You just showing them to them?
Just showed them to them, and they'll have them in the jury deliberation room if they want to inspect further.
That's it.
All right, so we talked a little bit yesterday about your qualifications and your training and experience when it comes to latent prints. And you said you're now a senior latent print examiner in Broward County, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Have you ever testified in court where you've given an expert opinion in the field of fingerprint analysis?
Yes, ma'am.
And how many times?
Approximately 50.
You told us yesterday that you looked for latent prints in several areas of the home. Which areas did you look for the latent prints in?
The areas that were processed for latent prints were the entrance door, the front entrance door, the hall bathroom area, and I also processed the garage door, entry door, and I believe the master bathroom area, the windowsill where the window was unlocked.
Okay. And I want to specifically ask you about the latents that you collected in this case. If I could turn your attention to States 129.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize 129?
I do.
Okay. If you could open States 129 and let us know whether it's in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded it.
It was in the same condition or substantially the same as when I impounded it.
Did you open it?
Yes.
Okay. So how many total latent prints did you find in the home?
There were 9 latent lifts that I collected throughout the home.
And those were found in the areas you just told us about?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, except for the master bath that didn't have any latents of any kind?
No, ma'am.
Now, those latent prints that were found, could those be from anyone who has ever touched those surfaces?
Yes, ma'am.
Does a latent print tell you when a person touched a surface?
No, it doesn't.
Of those 9 total latent prints that you found, how many were of evidentiary value?
There were 2 of the latent lift cards that I collected that were determined to be of value for comparison.
Okay, and I think you had told us this yesterday, but when I say a value, I mean that there's enough of a print to even be able to compare it to something else, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, one you told us about yesterday, that was from the hallway bathroom tub, and you said it was a match for Brandy Peters?
It was identified to Brandy Peters.
Okay.
Yes.
And then where was the other latent print of value found?
The other one was from the interior garage entry doorknob.
Right, and I want to show you what I've marked as State 70 UUU, showing the defense counsel. You recognize 70 UUU?
Yes, ma'am.
What is it?
It's a picture of the garage door and the garage.
Is it a true and accurate depiction of the garage door from that angle?
Yes, ma'am.
And this time of the 70 UUU in that angle?
Any objection? There you go.
Permission to publish?
See, I thought that 70A through 3T were admitted, were they not? They were not, okay.
So we had, that was a couple of things that were
Okay,
I thought before.
okay. So 70UUU at this point in time,
Yes, sir.
they'll be admitted?
All right, so working our way out of the house, I know we've already seen this door in our last set of photos from, I guess, inside the kitchen. You could see the corner of the door. But what do we see in this photo?
It's the garage of the home.
Okay, so this would kind of show that entry door of the garage from both
Okay.
angles, interior and exterior.
Yes.
is this the door that you gathered that latent print from?
It is.
Okay, and where on the door did you find the latent print?
It was the interior doorknob.
The interior doorknob, meaning the doorknob that's
On the inside of the
kitchen?
home, yes.
Okay. And were you the analyst that performed a comparison of this fingerprint?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right, moving on from the scene of the home. Did you also attend the autopsies at the medical examiner office on Sunday, November 21st?
I did attend the autopsy of Brandy Peters.
Okay, so the day after you started processing the crime scene, you went to the medical examiner's office for Miss Peters' autopsy only?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Commissioner Approach?
No.
At the autopsy of Miss Peters, did you collect a buccal swab of Miss Peters?
I did.
And what is a buccal swab?
It's a swab that we take the same with the same Q-tip. It's the inside cheek area of your mouth. It's for DNA purposes.
And when you say for DNA purposes, you mean so that a DNA analyst can compare that swab to other swabs that you've taken?
Yes, ma'am.
And you said you take it from the inside of the mouth?
We just swab the cheek area.
Is that the same type of swab that you use on blood spatter and things inside the home?
The way that we collect it is similar. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I want to turn your attention to State's Exhibit 111. Do you recognize 111?
I do.
And what is 111?
This is the buccal swab that I collected of Brandy Peters at the morgue.
Does it appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded it?
It does.
This time I would move 111 into evidence.
Any objection? There you go. 111 will be admitted.
All right. If you could put that notebook aside or move on to the next one, I want to ask you about the other things that you collected from Ms. Peters.
Okay.
Did you collect, well, I'll give you a moment. Did you collect some scrapings from Ms. Peters?
I did.
And what is a scraping?
It's, I'm trying to think of how to explain it to males in a manicure way. It's basically just kind of a long wooden-like tube that's very flat on the ends, and it scrapes underneath your nails to get things from out in between your nails, and it's approximately that long. And we use it to get nail scrapings for any kind of evidentiary value.
Okay. And we noticed in some of the pictures that you showed us yesterday, and I think that you actually collected an acrylic nail from the scene, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So did Miss Peters have some acrylic nails?
Yes.
What is an acrylic nail?
I believe it's just kind of a fake nail that they glue on when you go to a manicurist and get your nails done. It's a nail that goes over your original nails that's longer.
Are those nails scraped underneath in the same way that someone who doesn't have acrylic nails, how you would scrape them?
Yes, yeah, we just go underneath any part of your nail, just trying to get into the nail bed to get any kind of evidentiary value that would have stayed in there.
All right, so I want to turn your attention to states 103, A through J. Actually, would you mind showing the jury what you're looking at there in your notebook?
It's a large compilation of evidence that I collected.
Okay, so each swab is inside like a plastic folder?
Yes, like a laminated section.
Okay, thank you. All right, so looking at states 103, A through J, please let me know if you recognize those items.
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And what are states 103A through J?
These are all of the nail scrapings that I took of Brandy Peters. I took one individually for each of her fingers.
Okay, can you tell us, so you took a thumbnail, a fingernail, a middle nail, a ring nail, and a little nail from each hand?
Yes, ma'am.
And each of those are all reflected in states 103A through J?
They are, yes.
At this time, I would move, are they in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded them?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
This time I'd move 103A through J into evidence.
Any objection? No. 103A through J will be admitted.
Okay, at this time I want to turn your attention to 103K through Q. Do you recognize K through Q?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And what are K through Q?
These are swabs that I took of the hand area and neck area of Brandy Peters.
And how do you swab a deceased victim's hand and neck area?
The same way we collect a sterile swab of any kind of suspected blood on the wall, we still use the same sterile swab, and we use distilled water that's also sterilized, and collect a sample of each. So I'd put it on the Q-tip, and then for specifically her neck area, I would just swab along her neck.
And which areas of her neck and hands did you swab?
I believe it was the left side of her neck, the right side of her neck. I took the back of her hands and the palm areas of her hands.
Of both hands?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what about 103Q? Where did you swab there?
I took a swab of her right earlobe.
Any specific reason why?
There was a darkish material on there. I wasn't able to determine what it was at the time, so I collected a swab of it.
Okay. And are 103K through Q in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded them?
Yes, ma'am, there.
At this time, I move K through Q into evidence.
Any objection? No. K through Q will be admitted.
All right, looking at states R through T. Can you tell me what R through T are?
These are hairs that I collected from the fingers of Brandy Peters.
And how did you go about collecting those hairs?
We have sterile tweezers. They're plastic tweezers. And so when I located them, I believe it was a pinky area was one of them, her left pinky, her right ring fingernail, and her right pinky finger. There were hairs that were just kind of attached to her hands. So each one I used sterile tweezers and took them, and then we put them inside of the evidence envelopes.
And were R through T, are those in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded them?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
This time I move R through T into evidence.
Any objection? There. R through T will be admitted.
Looking at U and V, what are U and V? 103 U and V.
These are nail clippings that I took of Brandy Peters' hands.
And you took one nail clipping from each hand?
Well, I clipped every single nail, and they were collected as her left hand nail clippings and her right hand nail clippings.
Thank you. And are U and V in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded them?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
This time I move U and V into evidence.
Any objection? No. To be admitted.
I want to ask you about W, X, Y, and Z. What are W, X, Y, and Z?
These are the 4 projectiles that were collected by myself at the autopsy of Brandy Peters from inside of her body.
And those 4 specific projectiles, where were they found?
They do all appear to be in the same condition.
This time I would move W through Z into evidence.
Any objection? To be admitted?
All right, skipping to 103BB. What is 103BB?
This is hair that I collected from the right sock of Brandy Peters at the morgue.
And did you collect that hair in the same way that you told us you collected the hairs from her hands?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it in the same does it in its packaging appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded it?
It does.
At this time I move 103BB into evidence.
Any objection? Be admitted?
What is state's 103CC?
It's not in here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I left a box down there next to you of some other items. Those won't fit in the notebook.
Okay. I apologize.
Permission to refute the evidence, Judge?
You may.
All right, so have you found 103CC?
I did.
What is 103CC?
It's a red and black wig that I collected from Miss Peters' head.
If you could open it and just let us know by looking inside if it looks like it's in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded it.
It is.
Would you hold it up for the jury? I'm sorry. At this time, I'd move state's 103CC into evidence.
Any objection? Be admitted?
And permission to publish?
You may.
Okay, thank you. I want to turn your attention next to 103DD. Should be in your box as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the...
103DD.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize 103DD?
I do.
And what is 103DD?
It's a pair of socks that the victim was wearing I collected at the autopsy.
Okay, could you open 103DD for us? Looking inside, does it appear to be in the same condition as when you impounded it?
It does.
This time I'd move states 103 DD into evidence.
Any objection?
There you go.
Permission to publish?
You may.
Okay, next 103 EE. What is 103 EE?
It's the yellow tank top and the pink bra that I collected from Brandy Peters at the morgue.
And if you could open 103 EE and let us know whether it appears to be in the same condition as when you impounded it.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd move 103 EE into evidence.
Any objection?
There you go.
Be admitted.
Permission to publish?
You may.
Next, 103 FF.
Yes, ma'am.
What is 103 FF?
These are the jeans and the black underwear that I collected from Brandy Peters at the morgue.
And could you open it and let us know if it's in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded it?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
At this time, I'd move 103 FF into evidence.
Any objection? There you go. Be admitted.
Permission to publish?
You may.
Be happy to assist you if you need it, but would you mind putting on some gloves? And I'd like you to just point out to the jury any suspected blood that you see on those jeans.
you need to stand up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And can the witness step down from the witness stand if she needs to?
I think she'd be better just to stand up there where she is, so they can see her.
So the suspected blood areas, they're essentially, it's all over the jeans.
So all the discoloration that you see there?
Yes. All the sites here.
Your Honor, can I approach up and hold those up?
Okay.
He's a little taller. He might be able to get him up a little higher for all the jurors to see. Now that Mr. Fuchs has him, if you could just start with the left leg there, or the leg closest to you.
It appears that all of the discoloration in this area can be attributed to what would be suspected blood.
And moving on to the next leg.
Sorry. And then we have it all here, along the sides, through here, and down, and then her leg area as well, of the cup of the jeans.
And can you point out any suspected blood on the back of the jeans?
Yes, again, this is colored areas where she was laying. The bottoms of the jeans as well. You have it all along the top, and on the pockets, and all along down the sides.
Okay, thank you. And I'd ask you to do the same thing with the tank top and the pink bra from States 103 EE.
And again, it's any of its colored areas that you can see, it's essentially most of the bra. And you have a hole in the bra as well, and all along the straps, and it's also gone on the inside.
Okay. And you did collect a projectile from the chest cavity, correct?
Yes, ma'am, I did. On the yellow tank top as well, you can see there's several holes through it, but it was yellow, so I would say that any of the colors that you can clearly see where there's staining of the blood, all on the front, on the inside, and along the back as well.
Okay, thank you. And finally, just the pair of socks from States 103 DD.
The same with both the socks. This was a gray sock, so you can see the suspected blood areas on the bottoms of the feet here and on the side as well. Then the multicolored sock you can see on the side, on the bottom of the feet area, and on the other side as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Fuchs. I want to turn your attention to 103 GG. We'll be going through GG, HH, and II next.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize GG?
I do.
What is GG?
This is the tongue piercing that I collected from the morgue from Brandy Peters.
Okay. Does it appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded it?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd move 103 GG into evidence.
Any objection? There you are. Be admitted.
103HH. Do you recognize it?
I do, yes, ma'am.
And what is it?
This was a sexual assault kit that was taken by the medical examiner on Brandy Peters that I collected from the morgue.
Okay, so while this autopsy is happening, the medical examiner also did a sexual assault kit and just gave it to you to be impounded into evidence.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you weren't the person that actually performed the sexual assault kit.
No, ma'am.
All right. Does it appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded it?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
This time I move 103HH into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Be admitted.
And finally, 103II. What is 103II?
These are the fingerprints and palm prints that I recorded of Brandy Peters at the autopsy.
And do they appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you impounded them?
They do.
This time I move 103II into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Be admitted.
And while you were at the autopsy, were photos taken of Miss Peters and all of the items that y'all collected from her?
Yes, ma'am.
And the medical examiner, they take photos as well?
They do.
Okay, I've left one other item of evidence down next to the stand for you, and it's labeled 118A.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you sent a few items in this case a few months after this incident to process for suspected blood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what were those items?
It was a white t-shirt, a white cloth, I believe, and a glove, a fabric glove.
Okay, the white T-shirt, was that TPD item number 6?
It is.
Was the pair of white gloves item number 155? TPD item number 155?
Yes, ma'am.
And the piece of white cloth, TPD item number 152?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so what were you supposed to be processing those items for?
I was requested by Investigator Johnson to perform a presumptive blood test on them. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement actually determines, and they do the blood testing to determine if it's blood or not, but in our unit we have presumptive blood test kits where we collect a swab, a sterile swab similar to the way we collect all of our swabs of the area, and you put it in a kit in this thing that they give you, and it will let you know whether it's presumptive positive for human blood or not.
Okay, if you could open 118A, and when you inspect the item, just let us know, without showing it to the jury yet, because I know you weren't the person that collected it, but whether it is in the same condition as when you impounded it.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And the white T-shirt you received, the white gloves, and the piece of white cloth, all three of those items had stains on it, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that why investigators sent it to you to see if the stains were in fact blood?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so how did you do the test, and what were your results?
So I started by doing a control test because we have the packages that we use to determine it. So I did a control test on known blood to see whether or not the test actually worked. And so I photographed and documented that prior to starting these tests. And then for each of these items, they told me that they were stained, and I collected a swab of the stain areas on each of the item and performed separate tests on each of those as well, and photographed and documented the findings of those.
What were your results? Were these stains actually blood?
All of the tests came back negative.
Okay, so there were no stains on the gloves, the white cloth. I'm sorry, there was no blood in the stains on the white T-shirt, the white gloves, or the white cloth that you received, and that was in April of 2011?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what did you do after you tested each of these items?
I sealed the evidence back up and returned it to our property and evidence section.
And just to be clear, the white shirt that you just looked at, that's the same one that you tested to see if that was actually blood in those stains?
The stain that they swabbed, yes, ma'am.
All right. That's all I have for you. Thank you.
Cross.
Your Honor, she needed to complete viewing some photos before I speak to her. If we could take a brief break.
Why don't you get the rest of what you want to do with it done?
I don't have any other questions for her.
Okay. But it's just a matter of we're looking at the pictures.
Yes, sir.
All right. She can do that before she leaves. All right, you can step down, Ms. Press. You need to remain. We need to finish looking at the pictures you were looking at. You can stay in the courtroom to finish that if they're in the courtroom.
Okay.
Why don't you just sit in the front row there and finish that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Call your next witness.
They called Joanne Maltese.
Okay. I tell you, maybe it would be a good idea to take a short break. Let me let the jury step out. We'll be about 10 minutes. All right. Items there might be some issue about. There hadn't been an objection yet, except for the, didn't relate to foundation or authentication. Why can't we get a few stipulations? We could cut this in half if we had some stipulations. Are you hesitant to stipulate the foundation on these items, Mr. Prince?
No, I just hadn't been asked about a stipulation.
I don't know why people don't ask.
Your Honor, the answer is because Mr. Prince has made an issue out of opening statements and his intention of the fact that he's going to attack the fact that rusted judgment essentially and that TPD didn't do their job, so we felt
that doesn't have anything to do with admitting the evidence. We're just wasting time. Let's go through the evidence y'all expect to admit. If Mr. Prince has objections to any of the items, we'll take up those objections with the witness. Otherwise, we'll admit it by stipulation. That doesn't mean the witness can't explain what it is, but about half the time it's just us sitting here watching a witness look at something, which is just a waste of time. So we'll take 20 minutes. Let's go through the evidence that's going to be presented and figure out what we can reach stipulations to. Will be 20 minutes. A through G will be admitted by stipulation. We may need to deal with some of the rest of these individually. What about 127, A through G? There's some pictures of a Monte Carlo.
No objection to this.
State intend to offer those?
Yes, sir.
They'll be admitted by stipulation. 128A through X, some pictures of a truck. Their objection to that?
No, Your Honor.
State intend to offer that?
Yes, sir.
Be admitted by stipulation. 129, are those the prints Ms. Pressey was talking about?
Yes, sir, and Ms. Maltese is going to testify to those two, and we would offer them in evidence.
Any objection to 129?
No, Your Honor.
Be admitted by stipulation.
I also have an addition to the witness list for this morning, evidence list for this morning. It's exhibit 130, A through E. These are pictures that were taken on the 23rd, which Mr. Prince has already seen.
They're pictures of what?
Pictures of the crime scene taken on the 23rd of November.
Their objection to 130, A through E.
No, Your Honor.
They'll be admitted by stipulation.
Also, Your Honor, an add-on would be 131, the couple swap from Antonio Anthony.
From whom?
Antonio Anthony, the father of two different minors.
Is there objection to that?
No, Your Honor.
Be admitted by stipulation.
I was also informed by the clerk that I did not admit 57H, so if I could do that.
So that was an add-on. We had 57A through G. You say there's an H?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there objection to that?
No, Your Honor.
To be admitted? Okay. So we'll cut through the evidence a little bit quicker. I'm going to tell the jury that we've spent some time arriving at stipulations as the admission of the evidence that the parties agreed to cut down on the time frame. Anybody have a problem with that?
No, Your Honor.
All right, let's have a jury, please. All right, everybody be seated except for the witness. If you would face the clerk and be sworn, please. Before you start, Ms. Dugan, I know our break extended a little bit because we were taking care of some business. What I went over with the attorneys, it seemed to me a little waste of your time that we're going through a process of admitting different piece of evidence where there were no objections to any of it. So I've gone through the evidence with the attorneys, determined what there might be issues about, and we've admitted most of the rest of the evidence already, so that should save us time. I know it might seem like we were wasting your time, but hopefully we were speeding things up for your consideration. So you may proceed, Ms. Dugan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Maltese. Will you introduce yourself to our jury, please?
Joanne Maltese, last name spelling Maltese.
And where do you work?
Work at the Tallahassee Police Department.
What unit are you in over there?
I'm in the forensics department. I've worked for the police department for almost 26 years and in the forensics unit for 18 years.
And your main duty in the forensics unit, processing crime scenes?
Yeah, so documentation and evidence collection as well as latent print examination within the forensics unit.
Can you tell us a little bit about your education and experience to become part of the forensics unit?
During the 18 years in forensics, I've taken over 1,500 hours worth of classes to include crime scene reconstruction, photography, latent print examination, palm print examinations. I also teach basic recruits at Pat Thomas Law Enforcement Academy, as well as advanced crime scene at Pat Thomas Law Enforcement Academy.
I'm going to take you back to November 20th of 2010. Did you respond to 908 Saddle Creek Run that day?
Yes, I did.
And what was your role there that day?
I was there to assist the crime scene techs there and offer any advice or opinions, help them with anything that they needed.
Okay, so you weren't the person that was the main one processing, you were just kind of overseeing and helping?
Yes.
All right. I want to show you a couple of photos that were entered into evidence previously yesterday. Looking here at 70 EEE. What part of the home are we seeing here?
It's going to be outside the front door. The front door, if you look to the left of the photo, that is the front door, and it's part of the garage wall, the exterior garage wall and the walkway.
And is there actually a laser up there on the witness stand for you?
Yes.
Oh, great, thank you. If you could just point out to the jury where the front door is, everything you were just talking
Front
about.
door is on the left side of the photograph. And across the photograph itself is the garage door, or the garage wall.
Okay. Let me look within the scales here. If you look closely, what do we see?
There is a scale that runs vertical and horizontal on the wall, as well as smaller 2-inch scales placed on that wall. And there's some Sharpie writing that was done to show direction.
What about all these tiny dots? What are those?
All the tiny dots are suspected blood.
I'm going to show you this photo from a little bit of a closer angle in 70 FFF. Now, looking at the wall from this angle, what do we have down here?
That is going to be an electrical outlet.
Okay, and so the electrical outlet is right here in this photo?
Yes, in the first photo, the electrical outlet is at the bottom. The second photo is a close-up photo of the first, with the electrical outlet being at the bottom.
Okay. You obviously deal with blood that you find at crime scenes as part of your job. I mean, how often do you come across crime scenes where there's blood?
Quite often.
And that was over how many years of experience?
18.
Have you had training when it comes to blood direction?
Yes, I took a course in Miami-Dade on blood direction.
And have you taught in the areas of blood spatter or blood direction?
Yes, I do, in my advanced crime scene class.
Can you tell us a little bit about the blood direction that you see in this photo?
In the photo, if you can zoom in just a little bit, after reviewing the suspected blood drops, we drew on there just for visual, so you can see it and document what we were seeing. Where you see circles and arrows. The circles are the blood drop that I used for that particular direction, and the arrow is pointing to where it came from, which is called point of convergence.
Can you show us which, the circles and the arrows?
If you see, looking at the ones on the right side, you'll see the circles. These circles are circling individual blood drops, and then I determined the direction where they were coming from. So they are coming from somewhere on the upper left side of the photo. On the left side of the photo, you'll see circles of suspected blood drops with a direction coming from the bottom right. So the arrow is pointing is where they came from.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you're able to tell what direction they're coming from.
Blood is very viscous, it's very thick, like syrup, it wants to stay together. When it's flying through the air or dropping or wherever it's coming from, when it hits a surface, it will roll. Because it's very sticky, it will stick to the surface. So as it's rolling, you have a reverse of a snowball. Whereas a snowball is rolling and collecting more snow, a blood drop will roll and lose its mass and get smaller and smaller and smaller. So when the drop first hit, you have a larger impact area, and as it's rolling, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, so the drop appears to be pointy or oblong, getting smaller. So the direction it's going is where the small end is, or the pointy end is where it's going.
If you just have, obviously this is on the wall, if you just have a drop of blood on the ground, I mean, what can you tell about blood direction there?
Blood direction when it's falling, if it's almost perfectly circular, it's going to be a 90 degree. If it's really elongated, the angle is going to be more steep. And that's how, there's a mathematical formula that we use to figure out the angle that it hits. So the more circular it is, the more it dropped at a 90 degree. The more oblong it is, the more the degree that it hit, which would mean it rolled longer. It could be because either, there's a mathematical formula that we use to determine whether it's 90 degree, 30 degree, 40 degree.
Looking at this photo, what can you tell us about the blood direction on this wall? Where this blood came from, where it was going?
On the left-hand side, the ones that are circle are all coming from somewhere in the bottom right. You cannot tell exactly from where, but it's coming from the bottom right somewhere. And the ones on the right side are coming from the top left. It would appear that they were coming from somewhere in the middle, since that would be the point of convergence where they all came from.
Okay, so on some you have some of them going away from the house and some of them then going back toward the house.
Yes.
Right, and what about down below?
Down below at the bottom left corner, there's a suspected blood drop circled there with its direction coming from the top right of the photo.
And the farthest out this blood spatter goes, is this spatter right here? These last two?
The furthest one out, I believe, is here and here.
All right. I know you talked about about blood direction when there is just a drop found on the ground. If it's almost a perfect circle, that's usually just a straight down 90 degree. Are you able to give us any insight though into any of the other blood direction anywhere else in the home?
No, there was so much of it and all overlaying. No, we could not.
Okay, but this is the area that you were able to tell there. You were able to determine what direction it was going.
Yes.
Okay. I want to now ask you about the work you did with any latent fingerprints in this case. Can you tell me a little bit about your training and experience specifically involving latent fingerprints?
I've been a certified latent print examiner since 2004. I have taken several classes in fingerprints and comparing fingerprints. I also attend numerous conferences over those years for continuing education, as well as the lead senior latent examiner at Tallahassee Police Department, and I also instruct and teach new latent examiners.
Okay, and Your Honor, we're done with the overhead for this witness.
Okay.
Thank you. Have you ever testified in court where you've given an expert opinion in the field of latent field comparison?
Yes, I have.
And how many times?
Over 30 times in both federal and state court.
This time I would tender the witness.
Wish to voir dire is to qualification.
No, you're
You may.
All right, so there were 2 latent prints of value found in the home that day, correct?
Yes.
All right, which one did you do a comparison on?
One of them was compared and identified previously. There was one unknown remaining in which I compared.
Okay, and the one that was done and was compared previously was the one on the bathtub, and that was compared to Brandy Peters?
Yes, the bathtub faucet.
All right. And where was the latent found that you did a comparison on?
That's going to be on the interior garage entry doorknob.
Now, from this latent print, are you able to tell when it was left?
No.
So it could have been from anyone who's touched that doorknob anytime.
Yes.
Whose fingerprints did you compare that latent print to?
I compared it to Henry Segura and Brandy Peters.
And how did you do the comparison?
We do the comparison with a microscope or a magnifying device, and we put them side by side with known prints or standards of those individuals and compare the prints to see if they were made by the same person.
And what were the results?
They were not non-identified to both people.
Was the print then entered into APHIS?
Yes, it was entered into our automated fingerprint identification system, in which it will remain and just continue to run in case they get a hit at some point.
I mean, what is APHIS? As I know you defined it for us, but anytime someone's convicted of a crime, arrested, do they get fingerprinted?
Yes, it'd be convicted of a crime, arrested, they're fingerprinted and put into the database, as well as a lot of job applicants are also put into the database.
Were there any matches when this latent was put into APHIS?
No, there was not.
And is this APHIS system nationwide?
Yes, it is.
So everyone that's been arrested or convicted of a crime should be in that system?
Should be in all the states that put fingerprints into the system. Actually, my correction on this, no, APHIS is Florida only.
Does the APHIS system look only for matches on one search, or does it continuously search the system ever since you put it in?
It'll continually search. Florida databases only.
If there was ever a match, would Tallahassee Police Department have been notified of it?
Yes, we get notifications of reverse hits where they come back.
These other 7 latent fingerprints that were found but that weren't of value, what happens to them?
There's nothing we can do with those. Those are smudges or not enough information for me to compare and eliminate or identify someone else to it. There's just too much or too much smudging or not enough information, not enough detail.
Okay, so if there's not an entire print there, or there is a print but it's smudged, there's just not enough information for you to do any type of comparison on those?
Correct, there's just not enough information.
All right. That's all I have.
Cross?
No problem.
All right, any juror have a question of this witness? All right, if not, you can step down. We're going to keep her further.
No, she did.
You want to release her as a witness?
Yes, sir.
You need her for any reason? No, you're released. Thank you. Call your next witness.
Single call Caroline Carpentieri Wilder.
Get face the clerk in this one, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Would you introduce yourself to our jury, please?
I am Caroline Wilder, Wilder.
And was your name Wilder back in 2010?
No, ma'am.
Okay, what was your name at that time?
My maiden name is Carpentieri, Carpentiri.
Thank you. And what do you do, Ms. Wilder?
I'm a forensic specialist at the Tallahassee Police Department.
And how long have you been with forensics at TPD?
About 7.5 years.
Can you tell us a little bit about your education, your training, your experience that's led you to be with TPD for 7.5 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I attended college at FSU, and at that time, in 2006, for the summer, I interned with the TPD forensic unit, where I got a taste and realized this was the field that I wanted to be in. After I graduated Florida State in 2007, I went to the police academy and got my law enforcement standards. It's not a requirement for the field that I am currently in. I'm not a sworn law enforcement officer, but I got a very broad knowledge of general police work. I started in my current position in March 2010, and from there I got a lot of in-house training. It was a 6-month, very intensive program. And since then, I've been to many, many, many classes about crime scene reconstruction, latent print examination, and so forth.
Okay. I want to ask you about your role in this case on November 20th, 2010. On that day, that Saturday, did you respond to 908 Saddle Creek Run?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And did you go back later days, too, to help process the scene as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Were you there? Were you there on Monday?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Were you there on Tuesday?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that would be November 23rd.
Yes, ma'am.
And I want to turn your attention to a few photos of some items that you collected.
Looking at what's been admitted as 70 GGG. It's kind of an overall view of the foyer after the Lupo Crystal Violet was applied.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And then 70 HHH. What do we see in this item? Your Honor, would you mind bringing the lights over? What do we see in this photo?
This is a photograph of the carpet near the foyer area. You can see that there is the purple staining from the Luco Crystal Violet in that photograph.
70 III. This is an up close view of that.
Yes, ma'am. It's an up close of that. This is before I have marked any pieces of evidence. In the very center, you can see what was collected as a suspected artificial nail that had been broken off.
Okay, and it's right here in the center of the photo that I'm zooming in on.
Yes, ma'am.
Looking at 70 JJJ, was that the nail after you zoomed in on it and put the evidence marker?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, and did you actually collect that acrylic nail?
Yes, ma'am.
UBC states 88 in front of you,
Yes, ma'am.
and that appears to be the same as when you impounded it in evidence?
Yes, ma'am. Just the only exception, I can see FDLE evidence tape on it, so it appears it's been there, but other than that, it's the same.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind just looking at the other items there on the witness stand that you also have in front of you, are those all items that you collected from the scene that day?
Yes, ma'am.
And they're labeling their packaging is the same as when you impounded it?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you what's been pre-marked as 70 KKK and entered into evidence. What do we see here?
The photograph that we're looking at is obviously it's of the floor. The front door is to the left of the photograph. You can see a little bit of the tile in the bottom left corner. There was an artificial tree that was in this area. It had been upturned, and so I was photographing sort of an overall view before I started closing in on items of evidence.
Okay. 70 LLL.
This was more of a close-up of the tree. We have upturned it to its proper position and started examining the branches. In the middle of that photograph, you can see what we suspected to be a bullet hole.
There should be a laser up on the witness stand for you. You could point out
sorry.
to the jury where you see the indentation.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry. This right here is the suspected bullet hole that we observed in the tree.
Did you find any projectiles near the tree?
No, ma'am.
And in 70 MMM, did you mark that indentation with a evidence sticker or a scale?
Yes, ma'am.
What about in 70 NNN? What do we see here?
This right here is also on that tree. This was suspected blood that we observed on the trunk.
Did you take a swab of that blood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and it's there on the witness stand in front of you today?
Yes.
It's marked as states 86?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I want to show you 70000. What do we see here?
This is the front porch area. Where I was standing taking the photograph, the front door is directly to my left. So this is to the right of the front door on the wall. And you can see here that there are a couple of hairs or suspected hairs that were on that vinyl siding.
70 ppp and up close of the hairs?
Yes, ma'am.
And we see the scale there. Did you collect the hairs?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that's what you just identified in front of you, that states 87?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and 70 QQQ. What are we looking at in this photo?
This is the other side of the front porch. Now the front door is to the right from this
Can you
view.
show us where the front door is with your laser?
I apologize. The front door would be about here. You can see a little bit of the jamb right here. This right here would be the front door, and this is the front porch area to the left of the front door.
Did you find anything of evidentiary value on the front porch ground?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I want to show you this closer view, 70 RRR. Were you trying to get a closer shot of what you saw?
This is more of a mid-range photograph to show a closer up of the evidence that was found on the porch.
Okay, and what was that evidence?
There was suspected blood on the ground.
Can you see where it is in this photo?
I believe, from my vantage point, I believe it's around here. I have it marked in a separate photograph.
Okay. 70 SSS.
The suspected blood, obviously, right there.
Okay. And so this is on a portion of that photograph where it's actually in the shade of those, of that banister or railings, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did you do with this suspected blood?
I took a sterile swab of it.
Is this about where you were talking about?
It appears to be right in this shadow area, right there.
And the swab that you took of this drop of blood that was out on the front porch, is that there in front of you as states 94?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you collect a couple of items of evidence from inside the house as well, from different rooms?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I want to turn your attention to State's Exhibit 39B. What is 39B?
39B is miscellaneous paperwork from the Master Bedroom Entertainment Center.
Okay. And did you collect some items from the kitchen as well?
Yes, ma'am.
And what are the items from the kitchen?
Well, in front of me, State's Exhibit, I believe that's 110. Miscellaneous paperwork from the kitchen drawer, which was the southernmost drawer near the trash can.
Okay, I think that would be 100. I just have poor handwriting.
Oh, I apologize.
And
State's
101?
101 are trash bags from the cabinet above the drawer.
And are those all the items that you collected from the home that day?
I believe so.
you about a few more photos. These have been entered into evidence of by stipulation as 130A through P. In 130A, this is kind of just an overview of the foyer once the reagent was applied.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I want to ask you about some photos that you took of different marks that you saw in the reagent. Is 130B one of those photos of you trying to capture any marks you saw?
Yes, there was what we suspected could have been shoe impressions in there, and I wanted to make sure that anything that I saw that could be potentially used as evidence that I photographed.
Okay. And looking at both of these photos, are a lot of the photos that you take around in this area around where we see most of the purple to the right of the door as you walk in and leading into the living room?
I know I took photographs in that area. I can't recall specifically where the impressions were in these photographs.
Okay. I want to specifically show you some on the tile 130C. Are these some of the marks that you photographed on the tile that you thought maybe could possibly be used for something?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. 130D.
Yes, ma'am.
Did y'all apply any chemicals, looking at 130E, any chemicals to try to help these show up more in any areas of the home?
Well, in this area, you can see that there is the purple stain, which is the leucocrystal violet.
In the bathroom?
In the bathroom, I didn't use chemicals to try to enhance any type of shoe wear. Instead of using chemicals such as this, I used powder to try to, regular fingerprint powder to try to enhance any impressions that might be on that bathroom tile.
Okay. And looking at 130G, did you also try to measure these as much as you could?
Well, I didn't specifically note any measurements, but I take the photographs with a scale, so if they need or could be used later, then this size can be accurately represented.
Okay. And these are the photos where you tried to get any pattern with the scale?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you took these photos after the home was cleared by law enforcement and after the bodies were discovered by law enforcement, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and is this an overview of the reagent we see reacting with the carpet?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Any measurements you tried, or any scales you put down on the carpet?
Yes, ma'am.
You talked a little bit about the
Okay,
bathroom.
on 130, I may have noted it wrong. It's 130A through what?
P,
What's that?
P as in pig?
Okay, I must have misheard. I thought you said A through E, A through P. Defense have any objection to that?
No,
All right.
Did you also notice what maybe some type of pattern possibly from a shoe in the master bathroom?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, can you tell where that is in this photo?
No, I cannot.
What about in this zoomed in photo in 130N?
It appeared that there was a possible impression in this area, so I made sure I always take photographs before and after I process for anything. So this is the before photograph.
And what do we see in 130O?
It's, again, a possible impression on the tile. Like I said, I take the pictures before and after processing.
And 130P?
This is after processing. That's with, I used bichromatic magnetic powder to try to enhance any impressions that may or may not be there. After processing, this is the photograph.
Despite your and your other analysts' best efforts to enhance any of these in the foyer and the bathroom, were any of them complete enough impressions for evidentiary value?
Well, unfortunately, I am not a shoe wear expert, but in my experience, there was not enough for a comparison to be done.
Okay. Was there any complete shoe prints on any of them?
Not that I observed.
And were most of the patterns smudged or hard to make out?
There was a lot of distortion in a lot of these patterns, and I did not observe one that was a nice, clear print.
And that's what led you and your team to that opinion?
Well, that was my opinion. I can't speak for my coworkers.
Okay. And you work in latent fingerprints as well, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And the same way with the latent print, if it's smudged or if you don't have an entire print, is it difficult to make a comparison to any other known print?
Yes, ma'am.
Was there any suspected blood on any of these possible impressions?
Well, in the front foyer area, there was a lot of suspected blood. I did not observe any suspected blood in this back bathroom area.
Okay. And the foyer, obviously, there's suspected blood everywhere in there, correct?
Correct.
What about are you able to tell when any of these impressions were left?
No, ma'am.
That's all.
Cross. Very briefly.
Ma'am, how long did you say you were with TPD at the time the process was seen?
At the time I processed, it was about 8 months.
And how many times at that point had you testified as to shoe comparisons in court?
Never.
No further questions.
Okay, can you redirect? All right.
One moment, sorry.
Any juror have a question of this witness? All right, if not, you may step down. We need to keep her further. All right, you need her for any reason. Mr. Prince, you're excused. Thank you for being here.
Thank you,
Call
sir.
your next witness.
They call Shannon Gary. I believe so. I want to turn your attention to 115Z. What is 115Z?
Your item number 115Z is mine number 28A, pair of tan leather gloves from bed of truck.
And are those in the same condition as when you impounded them?
Yes, they are.
All right. And for 115AA,
Your item number 115AA is my items number 39 through 42, miscellaneous paperwork.
and that was the Bank of America withdrawal receipts and the Department of Revenue paperwork that we saw photos of,
Correct.
as well as I think the pay stub that we saw photos of.
That's correct.
All right, and does that item appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as the one?
Yes, it is.
All right, 115BB, did you also collect the driver's side front floor mat?
Yes, your item number 115BB is my item number 26, driver's front floor mat.
And does that appear to be in the same condition as when you impounded it?
Yes, it does.
All right, I want to turn your attention now to photos of another car that you searched. Did you respond to 5505 Tower Road to assist in the search of a white Monte Carlo on December 7th, 2010?
Yes, I did.
Okay. If you could look in the front of that notebook, there should be some some items for you. If you could first look at 127 A through G. Do you recognize 127 A through G?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize those to be?
This is the white Monte Carlo at that location that I searched.
And are those true and accurate depictions of the white Monte Carlo?
Yes, they are.
This time I've we have already been reviewed evidence by stipulation, permission to publish.
You bet.
Right, looking at 127A, what do we see here?
This is the white Monte Carlo.
In here?
This is again exterior of the white Monte Carlo.
In 127C?
This is the passenger door of the white Monte Carlo.
And from inside the Monte Carlo, what items of evidence did you collect?
I started with swab of exterior driver's door handle, swab of interior driver's door handle, swab of exterior passenger's door handle, swab of interior passenger door handle, swab of steering wheel, swab of gear shift, swab of gas pedal, brake pedal, driver's seat belt, swab of passenger seat belt, trunk lock, ignition, radio knobs, glove box turn knob, driver's seat release lever, passenger seat release lever, driver's power window switch, passenger's power window switch, and then also a pair of tan leather gloves from the right rear passenger floor, pair of tan leather gloves from the left passenger floor, and unknown orange, red, and white items.
Looking at 127B, does this appear to be the right side of the car?
That's correct.
Okay, and what do we see here in 127B that you collected?
You see on the passenger's floor, you can see a pair of gloves.
And if you could find case 116T. What is 116T?
Your item number 116T is my 63A pair of tan leather gloves from right rear passenger floorboard.
And 127G, does this appear to be the left side of the car, the driver's side?
Yes, this is driver's side.
And what do we see here behind the driver's seat?
On the floor behind the seat, you can see on the passenger floor a pair of gloves.
And did you collect those gloves?
Yes, I did.
If I could turn your attention to 116U.
Yes.
What is 116U?
Your item number 116U is my 64A pair of tan leather gloves from left rear passenger floorboard.
And your T and U appear to be in the same condition as the clusters.
Yes, they do.
Finally, looking at 127F, what do we see here?
This is the trunk of the Monte Carlo.
And then 127E.
Again, another picture further out.
opening up 115Y, the blue coveralls. And maybe Mr. Fuchs can help you in showing them to the jury?
Certainly.
Mr. Fuchs, would you mind getting as far up as you could? Maybe you could take a few steps farther out. Thank you. Can we see the back as well? Thank you. All right, and in 115AA, the miscellaneous paperwork that you impounded. Could you open that item for us as well?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Could you open that item for us as well? Okay, and that was the Bank of America, the Department of Revenue, all of those documents,
That's correct.
all right? If you could open those as best you can so we could publish to the jury.
You want all documents shown?
Yes, ma'am.
They can read this later. Just move on.
Okay. We also had quite a few pairs of gloves that were impounded, specifically 115X and Z and W. Could you open those items?
Yes.
Okay, could you open those items?
Yes.
Thank you. Permission to publish the gloves to the jury, Judge?
Show them to him, yes.
Okay. And are those the 10 pair that were found from the truck bed?
It's 10.
Okay.
10 gloves, yes.
There was a total of 10 miscellaneous gloves and 2 different pairs of gloves found in the green Chevy, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then from the Monte Carlo, how many pairs did you collect there?
Collected 2 pairs of gloves from the Monte Carlo.
Could you open both 116T and U, please? Okay, and permission to publish T and U by showing them to the jury? No further questions of this witness. Thank you.
Cross.
Just very, very briefly, Your Honor. In case it's not clear, ma'am, as a forensic specialist, a forensic technician, your job is merely to go collect the evidence, correct?
Correct.
Not to gather any context about what the defendant does for a living or what those gloves are used for.
Correct.
Okay. Likewise, if any testing, biological DNA testing is done, that's something we get to hear from FDLE, not from you.
Correct.
Okay. No further questions.
Redirect.
No, sir.
Any juror have a question of this witness? All right, you can step down.
Thank you, sir.
We need to keep her any further?
No, sir.
Need her for any reason, Mr. Prince?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you're excused. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, at this time, table call investigator Mark Lewis.
May I retrieve the evidence, Judge?
What's that?
May I retrieve the evidence?
Please do. Return it over to the clerk. Face the clerk and be sworn, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. Slide up the microphone, please.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jurors?
Good morning. My name is Investigator Mark Lewis.
Okay. And Investigator Lewis, I see you're in uniform.
I
You work for Tallahassee Police Department?
do.
Okay. How long have you worked with Tallahassee Police Department?
Full-time since January of 1994.
Did you have part-time experience before then?
I was a reserve officer of TPD.
Okay. Do you have any other law enforcement experience?
No, I do not.
What is your current role with the Tallahassee Police Department?
I'm assigned to the Criminal Investigations Division.
Okay. What does that mean?
I investigate crimes after patrol responds and takes a report. I take the case from there and do the follow-up.
Okay. When you say follow-up, what are you talking about?
Try to find the person responsible for committing the crime.
Okay. How long have you been in the Criminal Investigative Division?
This is my second go-around in the Criminal Investigations Division. The first time began in 2002 until 2011. And then I just was reassigned in November of 2014 till present.
Okay. Between 2011 and 2014, what duties did you hold?
I was a field training officer.
What does that mean?
I was training police officers.
Back in 2010, the Criminal Investigative Division, do they have handle all kinds of crimes, or are they more geared towards specific types, sexual assaults, homicides, things along those lines?
We have specific types of the areas inside the Criminal Investigations Division, and persons assigned to them handle those types of crimes.
Okay. And as your assignment back in 2010, did you have a specific field that you were in the Criminal Investigative Division for?
I did.
What was that?
I was a homicide investigator.
As a homicide investigator, generally, what is the role of a homicide investigator?
To conduct follow-up investigations. You respond to a homicide, or any really death, and when we follow up with it.
When you say any death, so you're talking about both natural causes and unnatural causes?
That's correct.
So even though it may be a suicide or a natural death, they're still contacted for potential to look into it?
Yes.
Back in November 2002, November of 2010, did you become involved in a homicide of Brandy Peters and her children?
I did.
Okay. How was it that you became involved?
I was the on-call homicide investigator for the City of Tallahassee Police Department.
What does that mean?
When the homicides were discovered, I was the one who got the phone call.
As a homicide investigator, and generally a rule of Criminal Investigative Division, are y'all out there patrolling the community and things like that, like we see the marked units and officers in uniform, or do y'all have a different role in the Tallahassee Police Department?
We have a different role.
Okay. When you say on-call, does that mean that y'all just basically wait for a phone call or whatnot in order to get you involved?
Essentially, yes.
So how is it that you would receive a phone call? How is this initiated an investigation, if you will?
After a patrol responds to a homicide, they will notify dispatch. Dispatch locate the on-call investigator, and when dispatch would call us.
Okay. As I guess you were the on-call, does that, relegate you to a certain role, if you will, during a homicide investigation?
Yes.
And what would that be?
The lead investigator.
And what is the role of a lead investigator?
The role of a lead investigator is to take in the information from patrol officers, other investigators, people who are on scene, and taking information and start making assignments, tasks for people to follow up on.
Okay. Does the lead investigator also take on their own tasks, or are they more just a head coach, for lack of a better description?
Kind of like a head coach.
Okay. As the lead investigator in this particular case, were there other members of the Criminal Investigative Division assigned essentially to the homicide in order for you to delegate?
Yes.
Approximately how many are we talking about?
5.
Okay. As it relates to, you're talking about 5 investigators?
5 investigators to include myself, yes.
Okay. And who was that?
At the time, it was Investigator Dubrava, Investigator Basio, Investigator Corbett, Investigator Fernie, and myself.
Okay. And were all of them assigned to the Homicide Division as well?
No.
Okay. As a homicide investigator, if we can back up just a little bit, and of course, assuming a role of a lead investigator, have you undergone any kind of specialized training or anything like that to give you, I guess, tools in order to do the investigations?
Yes.
If you could, please explain to the jury what that would be.
Been to several schools, homicide investigative schools, interview schools.
Okay. And those schools that were, you said several homicide investigative schools, are we talking about, are they done by the city of Tallahassee or Tallahassee Police Department? Are they done statewide, nationwide? What are we talking about?
All the above. We've had some local state schools. I've attended a national school as well. But also as a Tallahassee police officer, I've responded to murders during my career, even though I'm assigned to the unit.
Now, how many schools are we talking about? Was it just a one-time occurrence, or is there something you ongoing disciplines and education?
It varies, but for me, it was one-time occurrences for those schools.
For each school?
Yes,
So multiple schools, one time each school?
correct.
Approximately how many kind of schools are we talking about?
Off the top of my head, I could think about 3 or 4 that I've attended.
Okay. And then you mentioned during your role at the Tallahassee Police Department in the Criminal Investigative Division, you've got a lot of experience.
I did.
Had you previously to this 2010 date been involved in homicide investigations?
Yes,
And that would be, were you also involved as a road deputy as well, whenever you first started your career?
yes.
Approximately how many are we talking about?
I've never counted, but
Fair to say a lot?
I don't know what a lot would be, but a considerable amount.
Talking about more than 10?
Yes.
More than 15?
I've,
Again, never counted.
I've never counted.
Fair enough. Okay. Would it be fair to say that during each one of those investigations, you learned from those experiences?
You definitely learn. Yes.
The national school you talked about, who put that on?
The national school, it was out of Louisville, Kentucky. Oh my gosh. I know it was a homicide school from the University of Louisville that I attended. I think it was the University of Louisville's homicide school.
Whenever you responded to this particular murder, what is it that you did first?
We try to find evidence, the means of how it happened, and who would want to do something like this.
Do you actually go out to the scene of the crime?
Yes.
Did you do so in this case?
Yes.
Did other officers, you mentioned quite a few, or I think it was 5 other investigators, did those investigators respond to the scene as well?
Not all of them, but most of them.
Okay. As the lead investigator and you come up on scene, do you start divvying out certain duties and things along those lines at that time?
You can, but on this scene, no.
Okay. When you divvy up responsibilities for certain people, do certain things, do y'all meet on a regular basis to discuss what may have been uncovered and things like that?
Absolutely, yes.
So as go back to the scene, and when you first responded, you said you tried to gather information. How do y'all go about doing that?
You gather information via the crime scene. You do interviews, canvasses of the neighborhood.
When you talk about the crime scene, what do you mean?
What evidence we have on the crime scene.
Okay. As my understanding, Investigator DeBravo was assigned as, I guess, a liaison for purposes of crime scene to report back to the team.
Yes.
Now, as you said something about canvassing the neighborhood, what does that mean?
You canvass and knock on every door in the area to figure out if someone saw something, identify a witness.
Okay. And do you yourself do that, or do you kind of assign that task to either investigators or street officers or
I
anything
think we
like
ought to
that?
start talking about what he did in this case. So let's get to what he did in this case. But
I'm
I'm a little
sorry.
confused whether we're talking in general or about this case. We've been back and forth. Let's talk about this case.
I'm sorry, bad phrasing of the question. I guess I was talking about this case. In this particular case, when you say canvassing the neighborhood, did you assign some persons to do that, or did you do that yourself?
Both.
Okay. And when you canvass this neighborhood, are you going door to door?
Yes.
What is the purpose of doing that in this case?
To identify a potential witness, obtain more information.
As it relates to this case, is this a one-time occurrence, or you go back multiple times?
I went back multiple times.
At some point, did you return to the location where there may have been I noticed in looking at things, there was a stadium in the fairgrounds that aren't very far away.
That's correct.
Did you go back at any time when there was a football game on, band on, things like that?
Yes.
Did you notice anything about the level of noise, essentially?
Yes.
What was it you noticed?
You could hear what was going on at Gene Cox Stadium from outside.
Okay. Was it loud, just normal?
Somewhat loud.
Okay. Did you go into the homes during that time period?
Yes.
Okay. When you went into the homes, did you notice a change in the level of that noise?
Yes.
What was that?
Didn't hear it.
Essentially, if I understand you correctly, then the homes basically drown out the noise?
Yes.
As the lead investigator, did you have occasion to go to the autopsy of the victims in this case?
I did.
What is the purpose of the autopsy?
To obtain more information.
And when you say obtain more information, what kind of information are you looking for?
Manner of death, the cause of death, was it personal, was it impersonal, what the person went through before death.
Why is that important to this investigation?
Because I could take that information, apply it to the information that I have already on hand, and figure out where the case is going to go.
How would the manner of death factor into the next steps in the investigation?
What the person went through, I mean, was how violent the trauma that the person would have gone through.
And why is it important to have yourself an investigator or another investigator there at the autopsy?
So we can send out information that we back each other up.
Who actually performs that autopsy?
The medical examiner.
As the investigator that's there, do you have any particular role during the actual autopsy?
Yes.
What is your role?
Again, to obtain the information and send it out to the team. So the case is ongoing, even though we're in the morgue, to identify somebody or a lead to follow up on.
Okay. Do you take any steps to have someone present for the purpose of collecting any evidence that may be obtained, physical evidence that is, by the medical examiner?
Yes.
Do you do that, or do you have somebody else do that?
The forensics technicians do that.
I'm showing some previously marked for identification purposes as 103AA. I believe it's already been introduced in the evidence. I should take a look at that.
Okay.
Do you recognize that?
Is our evidence. It's or packaged our evidence packaging with items inside.
Okay. Is that a particular item that you would have seized during the course of the autopsy?
Yes.
Okay. When you say it's packaged, what do you mean?
It's packaged for evidence.
Do you have a certain procedure you do in order to ensure the integrity of those particular items in packaging?
Absolutely.
Can you please describe that to the jurors?
We want to keep it as sterile as possible, so depending on what it is, we have certain policies and procedures in place at the police department to maintain the integrity of this evidence, i.e., we'll put it in certain packaging, we will put a label on it, we will seal it, and then we'll put evidence tape on it, day, date, time, and my initials on it to ensure the integrity of this piece of evidence.
Okay. As it refers to that the label that's on there, do you take any notes about where that particular item would have come from?
Yes.
Okay. What does that label indicate as far as where that would have come from?
The label indicates a projectile from the left upper arm of Brandy Peters and a foreign material from the scalp wound of Brandy Peters.
Okay. Now, you're not actually performing the autopsy, so how is it that you get that material in order to package it? How's it given to you?
The medical examiner obtains it. It's given to, in this instance, it was myself, and it was packaged in the morgue.
Let's move on, if we can, as the next steps, or another step involved in an investigation. As the lead investigator in this case, would you be charged essentially with sending things off for forensic analysis and things along those lines?
Yes,
Okay. And that forensic analysis wouldn't be done by you.
that's correct.
Who is it that performs the forensic analysis that we're talking about?
Members of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, their forensics team.
How is it you go about deciding what's going to be sent off and things along those lines?
We figure what would be of evidentiary value to help the leads in this case, to help identify the persons responsible.
And do y'all have any certain, I guess, we'll scratch that. I assume that one of the things as far as forensics go, you're sending off for DNA.
Yes.
And what is the significance of DNA towards your investigation?
Well, DNA can help identify a potential suspect.
Okay. What other kind of forensics were done in this particular case, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, I know we did a sexual battery kit. I know we did projectile. I know we did scrapings for DNA.
Let me stop you there. Projectile, what do you mean by that?
The bullet.
Okay. It's my understanding that multiple different bullets and projectiles were found throughout the course of this investigation, correct?
Yes.
And did you send those off for possible comparisons and in order to figure out whether they were the same gun or anything like that?
Yes.
Was that test also done by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yes.
Now, as it relates to DNA, and we've already had a couple of, I guess, buccal swabs were taken from the victims in this particular case. Is it also important to get buccal swabs persons to eliminate them as possible contributors? And in this particular case, the father of the younger victims.
Yes.
Showing some previously introduced into evidence as states Exhibit 110. I should take a look at that. Do you recognize that item?
Yes.
What does that item appear to be?
A buccal swab of Henry Segura.
Okay, and did you obtain that from Mr. Segura?
I did.
The person, Mr. Segura, that you obtained that from, do you see him in the courtroom today?
I do.
Can you please point to that person indicated in article of voting, please?
The gentleman over here in the black suit.
And Your Honor, may the record please reflect that he's indicated Mr. Henry Segura. Did you also obtain a buccal swab from the other children's father, Antonio Anthony?
We did.
I'm showing some previously introduced into evidence states exhibit number 131. I should take a look at that.
Okay.
Oh, what does that item appear to be?
A buccal swab.
And who was that buccal swab taken from?
Antonio Anthony.
As it relates to these buccal swabs, I know we heard about how we get them in certain ways from other persons. How does it that you go about doing a buccal swab on both Mr. Segura and Mr. Anthony?
We asked for consent for their buccal swab. Once consent is obtained, it's pretty much just a Q-tip. We swab it inside of their mouth or cheek. It goes inside of this, well, the sterile packaging that the Q-tip came out of, it goes back inside of there. Q-tip sterile packaging goes inside of here. It's sealed. The evidence tape is put on here. Day, date, initials of myself are put on here.
Okay. And was that procedure done in both the circumstances for those both those buccal swabs?
Yes.
I have no further questions at this time.
Well,
At this time, Your Honor, he'll need to remain under defense subpoena in the rule.
that's him, the state probably recalling him at some point.
That's the intent.
All right. So he'll probably come back to the stand later for some other issues, but as to the issues discussed this morning, anybody have any questions? All right, you can step down.
Thank you.
Remain subject to recall.
Yes, Your Honor.
Next witness.
Your Honor, this time state would request that we do a break for lunch. Our next witness is Dr. Lisa Flanagan, and she's scheduled to be at the
Okay. And I think we probably have some legal issues we need to deal with. We've got a couple legal issues we need to deal with. Before I do that, I told you each day I'd ask you whether anybody had, inadvertently or I guess it could be intentionally, but have been exposed to anything that they shouldn't have been exposed to. If so, if that happens, just let me know that, and then we'll talk to you privately. Anybody feel like they have anything they've been exposed to, media-wise or by other persons? Well, good. I think one of the jurors had raised with the bailiff that school starts August 14th. How many of you have school-age children? Okay. All right. So there was some question whether we could probably start a little later on the first day of school. We probably can arrange that, but if you'll just remind me later next week, got to see where we stand, but that we can accommodate things of that nature. All right. Have a good lunch. Let's be back here. I'm sorry. Say 1:45. Okay, 1:45, please. 12:45. Come back into session, please. Everybody either have a seat or step out, please. So I guess we're going to get into some dispute on autopsy pictures.
Yes, sir, just to kind of briefly outline what the objection is. I would object in whole to the admission of autopsy pictures for Tanaya Peters and Javante Segura. There's no issue at all about the cause of death. I don't think that they serve any probative purpose at all. There are some rather gruesome pictures in there. With respect to the pictures of Brandy Peters, if they want to have one picture of her on the table for identification from the side, they have several. I suppose I don't have a major problem with that. There are cumulative pictures of her taken from the side in there that I think are unnecessary and are a bit gruesome. More to the point with respect to Brandy Peters, though, are the direct pictures of the main wound to her face. There's no issue about what the cause of death is. Unless the state can articulate some specific basis to show that particularly gruesome picture, I would object to that and argue that it's more prejudicial than probative. As to the wounds on the head, there are several pictures of that. I have no problem with those at all. We intend to introduce those types of pictures as well. With respect to, before I leave Brandy Peters, I would say there are also pictures tracking the bullet paths through her body, which are, of course, very gruesome as well. There's no issue forensically, from our perspective, or debate about what the bullet, we have no issue with whatever the state experts are going to say about the bullet paths. And so I would say that those, again, would only serve to prejudice the jury and horrify them. With respect to Maya Peters, I certainly have no objection to pictures of the outside of the gunshot wound to the back of her head. Again, with respect to tracking the bullet, there's not a dispute. We're not disputing the angle of the shot or how far into her skull the bullet or the projectile went. So with respect to those pictures as well, I think that the pictures are more prejudicial than probative, as they are especially gruesome, and in that case of a child as well.
Mr. Pugh. From Ms. Dugan.
Judge, I've been handling this morning, Dr. Fernandez
So, first of all of the photos that we have here, she took hundreds of photos. The ones that we're introducing to her are ones that she selected that we just asked her which ones best help you explain the cause of the cause of death and the injuries in this case. And these are the ones that she told us. For Brandy Peters' head wound specifically, she does have a large head wound. I think it's on the left side of her head. And the medical examiner, when I met with her, she talked about how it's blunt force trauma, how much force would be exerted to make a wound of that type. And so I think it's relevant to show the extent of the injuries to her head and how they would have occurred. For the path of the bullet through, I think it was Tamaya's head, this is relevant to show how the crime occurred as well, where a shooter would have, the angle of the bullet, the trajectory, where a shooter would have, how it would have occurred. And these are all ones that, the state didn't choose, that Dr. Flanagan chose.
Our point, Your Honor, is that none of those issues are in dispute. So whatever Dr. Flanagan says about that, we're simply going to accept it. That's what it is, the angle of the bullets and all that. So given that there isn't a dispute about that, I would again assert that it's highly prejudicial. It's not probative of any fact that is in dispute, and would only serve to inform the judge.
And if I could,
You may.
even though we aren't saying that the children didn't die from, or, we're all stipulating that the cause of death in this case, but we still have to explain to the jury, and we can use an argument for things that Dr. Flanagan's saying, about each injury to explain how it would have occurred. Those can be used in argument and those are relevant.
When is Dr. Flanagan going to be here?
She will be here within the next 15 minutes.
I mean, it really is a matter of the expert's testimony as to whether the expert believes that it would assist her in explaining her findings to the jury, and as long as there's not repetition, and that's her belief, perhaps we need to hear that from her, though. Why don't we just plan to start about 5 minutes early with Dr. Flanagan. Let's have the pictures all available, and I assume the defense understands which pictures are going to be used by the state, and it would assist me, Mr. Prince, if you focused on any particular pictures by number, and if there's any repetition. But I'd kind of like to hear it from her, what the state has represented. And that, by and large, is the standard. Are they relevant to, based upon the testimony, to assist the witness in explaining her findings to the jury? I need to hear that from her. So let's just plan about 12:40, have her here, have the pictures. It shouldn't take but a few minutes. You hear that from her, assuming she says what the state has indicated she's going to say. The clerk and I are in agreement on all exhibits except number 6060, which is supposed to be a swab of the left hand of one of the children. I had that it was admitted. She has that it was not admitted. Assuming it was not admitted, is there any particular objection to that exhibit?
No, Your Honor.
All right, so 60 will be admitted. All right, we'll reconvene at 12:40. So Ms. Dugan's getting Dr. Flanagan.
Yes, Your Honor.
We're going to do something here first for the jury. We're going to do some testimony for the jury. Are they all back now? Yes, sir. They're heard. Swear the witness, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat, please. State your name for the record, please, ma'am.
Lisa Flanagan, that's Flanagan.
All right. Have you provided her with the photos you're proposed to use, Ms. Dugan?
Yes, sir. I don't know which specific ones that
We'll give them all to her.
offer.
Do you want me to identify for you ahead of time which ones?
That would be good.
With respect to the autopsy photos of victim Brandy Peters, it states 102. It would be D, E, G, I, O through T, W, Y, J through LL, VV through WW, and AAA and BBB.
Triple A's.
Yes. With respect to Maya Peters, I didn't mark the initial photo identifying her, but I don't object to a photo to identify who it is. But then after that, the only ones I don't object to are I, J, O, Q, and R. The rest I object to.
Your-
We have to review the staff as a whole, and you can go through and ask them about it. The judge will ask you questions.
Okay.
So those are 102 and 104. Were there objections? There was 106 and 108. One of those is Tanaya and one of those is Javante.
Yes, Your Honor, I object to all of those autopsy photos.
And that's just a generalized objection. Don't think we should get into them because you're not disputing the cause of death.
Yes, sir, 403 analysis.
Right. Dr. Flanagan, the prosecutors indicated that the photos that she has marked for identification to be presented to the jury are photos that you picked out to explain your findings. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
There is an objection as to some of these photos based upon them being overly gruesome, I guess. I guess that'd be the only way to describe it. Are there photos in there that you feel like you could do without that would not interfere with your ability to explain each of your findings in the case? In other words, are there repetitious photos in there?
I tried not to put repetitious photos in there. I went through and picked out the photographs that were as clean as the ones that I have, the ones where I've cleaned the blood off. But she has many, many injuries, and the photographs show different angles, and basically I tried not to duplicate them, but yes, some injuries show up in more than one photograph, but that's because I had to show different angles to get a better view of the wound that I was trying to document.
You want to cross on that, Mr. Brent?
I suppose it would be most helpful to have the photos so I could ask her specifically why that photo is necessary to explain her testimony and findings. Or do you want me to just inquire generally?
We're not going to go through
Yes,
each
sir.
photo
Okay.
at this point.
With respect to victim Brandy Peters first, the photos that I'm most concerned with are the ones of internal examination, where you're tracking bullet paths and things of that nature. You can't really, would you agree that you can't really tell as a layperson what you're looking at there anyway? Could you explain verbally to the jury without having to show them internal pictures of the victim in an effective and clear manner without showing those pictures?
Well, I think the photographs, the ones you're talking about with the probe through them, show the wound tracks through her body. They're the only ones that actually, as far as the gunshot wounds, caused injury to an internal organ. I didn't show any pictures of the organ itself, but kind of implying this is where the lung would be, and I just show the path that it took through that chest. And they're the only gunshot wound injuries that, as I said, caused any significant internal trauma.
I mean, you're going to verbally explain all that to the jury as well as you're showing pictures, correct? That's your plan?
Yes.
Could you explain just as effectively what the path is by simply saying, look, the bullet entered here on the left side of the victim's torso and exited there on the right side of the victim's back? Can you do that in a manner that is clear, as you did in your report?
I mean, I could try, but obviously I'm not able to know how they're interpreting that and if it would help them visually to see the wound track through her body.
With respect then to the wound, the primary wound to the victim's forehead on the left side, that's really the only specific individual wound that I have great concern about. Could you explain that wound and how it led to the victim's death without having to show pictures of that wound?
Well, that particular wound is probably the most significant wound of all that she sustained. It's probably the fatal wound.
Could you just say that and let the jury know that there was a significant injury to the left side of her forehead with skull fractures and breaks and all that caused brain hemorrhage? Could you just explain it like that without having to show that part of the pictures?
Again, I can't tell what they would interpret from my words when there's a photograph to show it. Even her identification photograph will show the injury to her face.
I understand. I would just make argument, Your Honor.
You can be heard.
All of this is subject to a 403 analysis. Clearly, it would be, in the witness's opinion, useful to be able to explain with photos so that they can see exactly what she's talking about, but that's not the end of the analysis under 403. And I would suggest that it's not especially probative or helpful. The topics that she's talking about, bullet track or the injury to the forehead, are not hard to understand topics. She can say where the bullet entered and where the bullet exited. She can explain that the injury to the forehead was the primary cause of death. She can explain that there was skull fracture and brain hemorrhage. I don't think that the jury needs to see the victim's face caved in up close to be able to understand that, especially when cause of death is not at all in dispute, which goes to the first part of the analysis as to whether it's even probative. So given that the testimony is not in dispute and given that the pictures are horrifying, I would suggest that it's not appropriate to put those images in front of the jury.
I'll overrule the objection. So, the jury, please. I've already sworn the next witness. You can have a seat. Everybody can have a seat, please. You may proceed, Ms. Dugan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Flanagan.
Good afternoon.
Would you introduce yourself to our jury, please?
Yes, I'm Lisa Flanagan. That's Flanagan.
Where do you work?
I work here in this district, which is District 2, at the medical examiner's office.
And what do you do at the medical examiner's office?
By training, I'm a forensic pathologist, but I work as a medical examiner for this district where I investigate deaths and that fall under the law. There are certain deaths or causes of death that we have to get involved to investigate, and so I investigate those deaths.
I guess you're called on by local law enforcement agencies, Tallahassee Police Department, Leon County Sheriff's Office to do that?
Yes, we currently cover 10 counties, so when deaths that fall under our jurisdiction, such as homicides or suicides, accidental deaths, then we take jurisdiction of the body and we complete a death investigation.
And how long have you worked in forensic pathology?
I've been working full-time as a medical examiner in Florida since 1995.
Can you tell us a little bit about your education and your training?
Yes, I received my undergraduate degree from Florida State University. I then attended the University of Florida College of Medicine, and I received my MD degree in 1990. After that, I completed a 5-year residency program in pathology, and I did that at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And that included training in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and I completed a 1-year fellowship position in forensic pathology, which is my specialty. I am board certified in all 3 of those areas, clinical, anatomic, and forensic pathology. And I became a medical examiner, and I worked down in Broward County in 1995. I worked there for about 5 years. I then was chief medical examiner in Palm Beach County for about 5 years, and then I moved here to Tallahassee, and I've been working full-time as a medical examiner since 2005.
And about how many autopsies have you performed?
At this point, I've performed over 4,000 autopsies.
What's the purpose of an autopsy?
An autopsy is part of the death investigation. It's when we examine the body. We do a thorough external examination, documenting injuries, any natural disease the person has. We also do a complete internal examination of the body that, again, to look for wound tracks, injuries, any natural disease the individual may have. As part of the autopsy, we also collect specimens to look at under the microscope and to test for toxicology to see if there are drugs in the person's system at the time that they died. Ultimately, we generate a report as to our findings, and we will sign the death certificate, which will include the cause of death and the manner of death.
Have you ever testified in court where you offered an expert opinion in the field of forensic pathology?
Yes, I have.
About how many times?
I haven't counted, but over 100 times.
I'll tender the witness at this time.
Any board IRS qualifications? You may proceed.
All right, so I want to talk to you specifically about 4 autopsies you performed on November 21st, 2010. Can you tell me the names of the individuals that you performed autopsies on that day?
Their names were Brandy Peters, Tamaya Peters, Tanaya Peters, and Jovanti Segura.
And what information did you receive prior to performing the autopsies?
Well, our office was notified that these individuals had been found deceased in the residence and that obviously it was suspicious. There was obvious trauma to the individuals, and the police, they started their investigation. I assumed jurisdiction because of the circumstances of the death, and ultimately the bodies were brought to the morgue, and I completed an autopsy on each one of them.
In which order did you perform the autopsies?
I performed the autopsy on Brandy Peters first, and then I finished with the 3 children. I did Tamaya, then Tanaya, and then ended with the little boy.
Did you take photos during the autopsies?
Yes, as part of the autopsy, I will take photographs throughout. I'll take photographs of the bodies before I do anything, and then each step of the way to document the complete autopsy.
And aside from documenting it, do you take these photos to assist you in explaining the injuries should the case go to trial?
Yes, it's all for documentation purposes.
Okay. Do you have some photos up on the witness stand with you today?
Yes, I do.
All right. Are the photos of all 4 autopsies? You should have 4 different folders up there.
Yes.
All right. And for the record, that's 106 A through I, 104 A through R, 108 A through I.
102
Yes, sir.
you missed.
And 102 A through VVV. Who picked out those photos that we have here today?
I picked them out.
Okay. And you picked those out of all of the photos that you took that day at the autopsy. Are those the photos that best help you explain the injuries and the cause of death of these 4 people?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Did you also create some body diagrams when you did these autopsies?
Yes, I did. As part of the autopsy, I used body diagrams at the time that I'm doing it, basically to jot notes down and to draw the injuries and just document it as far as a body diagram.
Okay. I think on the witness stand up there, we have 2 of the body diagrams for you, for Brandy Peters and for Tamaya Peters. Those 2 sets of drawings, 132 A through I and 133 A and B, those are drawings you make to help you document all of the injuries to each person?
Yes, they are.
Okay. At this time, and those have been previously disclosed to defense, at this time I would move into evidence 132 A through I and 133 A and B.
Any objection?
Nothing additional.
All right, they'll be admitted.
Permission to publish?
You may.
For the remainder of Dr. Fleming's testimony, we're going to use an projected judge. All right, so let's first talk about the autopsy of Brandy Peters. How did you begin the autopsy?
Well, as I said, I take photographs throughout, so I documented everything, how her body was. When I initially saw her, she was clothed. The clothing eventually was taken off, and then the body was cleaned and all the wounds documented.
Okay, and what was her height and weight at the time?
Her height, she was, I believe, 63.5 inches, and we estimated her weight to be about 160 pounds.
All right, I want to show you what I've marked as 132A. What do we see here?
These are diagrams, the head diagrams that show the front and back of the head. In this particular diagram, I'm documenting the injuries of her face. The most notable one is this large open wound that's involving the left side of the forehead and that extends down here towards her eye. There are also several other smaller lacerations of the skin.
Do you see any wounds that were fatal for Mrs. Peters?
Yes, with this this wound is drawn this way, but it actually was an open, gaping wound where I could see internally, inside her head.
And in 132B,
This is a body diagram showing the sides of the head. On her scalp, here you can see several lacerations. As part of the autopsy, I did have to shave the scalp in order to see the individual wounds. So each individual wound is examined and described. In this photograph, you can also see there is a single gunshot wound here to her ear.
132C, what do we see here?
This is a photograph where I've documented the injuries on the back of the head. Again, you see several lacerations of different configurations and sizes. There is also one of these injuries that ended up being another gunshot wound.
And in 132D?
This diagram shows the top of her head, again showing lacerations, and these were somewhat larger lacerations here on the right top of her head, and then two that were on her, along her upper forehead.
132E?
This is a diagram of a brain, and on this I described and wrote areas where there were actual injuries. She had multiple blunt impacts to her head that you can see from all of the lacerations. That was also causing injuries to her brain itself, so there's several areas where there's bruising and hemorrhage within the brain tissue. This is a diagram of the skull. Here, this lower one here is the top of the head. The one up here is the base of the skull. So basically that's looking at the top of her head, but the brain has been removed. So it's the base of her skull. It's where her brain would be resting and sitting in life. I drew all these lines in here. This whole area of her basilar skull was fractured. And then here on the forehead, there were two separate depressed skull fractures where the impact actually fractured the skull and caused a depression in those two areas.
132G?
This is a diagram. She also was shot several times, and this kind of does an overall of each of the wound tracks and in general where they went. There was a gunshot wound here that you saw to her right ear. It did not go in very deep. It just went in about 1.5 inches. So there was that gunshot wound. There was a second gunshot wound that you saw in the back of the head. Again, that one did not go in very deep. It did not even penetrate the skull. And it was just the projectile was recovered from under the scalp. For 3, there was a graze wound on her right anterior arm. So that wound didn't even penetrate the skin. It just grazed across the surface of the skin. There was an entry wound here on her right anterior chest, and that I termed it a possible re-entry. It may have been a continuation of the wound that grazed her arm and then entered her chest. But that projectile did enter the chest. It passed through her left chest cavity and injured her lung, and I was able to recover that projectile. She had another gunshot wound here that actually was going downward. It entered her left upper chest, and it perforated her left breast, which means it went in and then out, and then it went in again on her upper abdomen, and that projectile just stayed in the skin along the anterior abdomen, so I was able to recover that projectile. She had another gunshot wound of her left superior shoulder. That one also went into the body and out, but it just stayed right there in the shoulder area and did not cause significant injury of anything internally. And she also had a gunshot wound here of the back. This one went in, and I had a little arrow showing the direction it was going. And I recovered that projectile here from her left lateral shoulder. So that wound track, it did also pass through her left chest and injured the lung. And then here on her right arm, there was a perforating gunshot wound, where again, it went in and out along her forearm. These are diagrams of her hands. She had significant injuries of both of her hands, what we term defense-type injuries. There was swelling, there's abrasions where there's actual breaks in the surface of the skin. There were fractures. There were 2 fingers that were fractured on her right hand and 2 on her left. There was here the webbing between her index and middle fingers, that was torn from injuries. So this just shows the significant injuries of her hands.
And when you say defense-type injuries, what do you mean by that?
These are injuries that we will typically see when someone's being attacked and they're trying to fight off the attacker, so they may be putting their hands up to try to protect their own body from being injured, and individuals can sustain injuries to their hands and forearms just from fighting off an attack.
And when you say fighting off, even just by putting their hands up?
Yes.
Finally, 132I.
This was, again, another hand diagram. I was trying to document her fingernails. Several of them were broken. There was an injury here where the left little finger was almost amputated. So it was just a diagram basically showing what was going on with her nails.
And how old was Mrs. Peters when you performed her autopsy?
She was 27 years old.
27 years old?
Yes.
All right, I want to show you the photos that you took that day of Miss Peters. I want to show you first 102A. What do we see here in this photo and the first couple of photos that the jury is going to see?
This was one of the initial photographs, so it shows how she was when I first saw her. You can see she has a shirt on and pants. It's hard at this point to see the injuries because there's blood on the skin, but this was just an initial photograph to show how she was.
102B.
Another initial photograph showing she had blue jeans on and she also had socks on.
102C.
This is a view from the other side, again showing her pants and her socks.
102D.
That one's upside down.
I apologize.
This a photograph of her, the other side, showing how she was initially.
Mm. 102E.
This photograph showing her head before I did anything as far as washing off the blood. There obviously is an injury here on her left side of her face. Here are some of the smaller injuries. Her hair, she did have a wig on and it was partially pulled back.
All right. From that photo, let's first discuss the head injuries that when Ms. Peters sustained. Looking at 102F, what do you see in this photo?
This is showing the right side of her face. Documenting this injury, there were some smaller lacerations. They varied in size, but this is showing a laceration here. Also, you can see her right ear where there's a gunshot wound.
And obviously in this photo, has her body, since she came in, been cleaned so you could better see the injuries by this photo?
Yes.
Looking at 102G, what do we see here?
This is a photograph of her frontal hairline. Here you can see some of these other injuries, and then there was this larger laceration there along the hairline.
In the next photo?
This is a photograph showing a broader area of the right side of her forehead. You see these lacerations, different orientations.
All right, moving to the other side of her forehead, what do we see in 102I?
This is a photograph showing the left side of her forehead. You can see this is a large gaping wound. The bone is fractured of her forehead under this area. Also, the facial bones here and around the nose, and this large gaping wound, which basically was open up into her cranial cavity. There is some froth here.
102J?
As the autopsy proceeded, I realized there were several injuries to her scalp that I was not able to see because of the hair. So that's why at this point I've shaved some of the hair off to show that I'm starting to see all of these injuries on the right side of her head.
And 102K?
This is a view of the right superior aspect of the head. Again, you can see there's several here on the right side and moving back here towards the back and the top of the head. Several injuries.
And 102M?
This is the laceration that was along the frontal hairline. I've shaved around it to show the actual size of that laceration.
And 102N?
This is the left side of her head where there are relatively few lacerations on this side. You can see the one on the forehead and the back of the head, but I didn't see any significant injuries on the left side of her head.
Did you also do an internal examination of Ms. Peters' head?
Yes, I did. As part of the autopsy, we have to reflect the scalp back and look internally at the bone and at the brain.
I'm going to show you 102O. What do you see in 102O?
This is a photograph of the scalp reflected. What we do is we'll make an incision from just above the left ear over to the top of the right ear, and then the scalp can be reflected forward and back just to expose the underlying bone and soft tissue. So this is the underside of her scalp. Those areas where the impacts were as far as the laceration, some of those you can see here that there's hemorrhage associated with them, those impacts.
And 102P?
This is the same type of photograph looking at the left side of her head, so the scalp has been reflected back and forward over her face. So this is the left side, and you can see there are not very many areas of hemorrhage. The hemorrhage, you see red here, that's muscle and soft tissue. These dark areas, that's where there's hemorrhage.
102Q? What do we see here?
This is a photograph of the forehead area. The scalp's been reflected back, so her face would be under this area. What this photograph is showing with that impact to the front of her head, as far as along the hairline, under it was this fracture. And you can see it's roughly circular and has radiating fractures from it.
And is this an up-close view of that fracture?
Yes, so what we can tell from this is the configuration of the object that her head was struck by. There's something that's roughly round that was hitting her head to cause this shape round fracture.
And 102S?
This is a photograph of the left side, but here you can see another depressed fracture. It's not as round as the other one, it's more oblong, but it's also a depressed fracture.
And then 102T?
This is a close-up of that where you can see the configuration of the depression in the bone.
Did you also take an x-ray of Ms. Peters' head?
Yes, I did. When someone's been shot, we will take x-rays and then we're able to see where the projectiles are located so that we can recover them.
Okay. Before we move on to the gunshot wounds, I want to ask you about these injuries to the head specifically. How would you characterize these injuries? Did you say blunt force?
Other than that, all of the injuries were caused by a blunt impact. So something is striking her head with significant force, enough to split the skin and also to cause the depressed fractures and especially the face, with the fracturing of her forehead and face.
And was this trauma, from what you can see, likely a result of a fist or an object, an instrument?
No, I think it was from an object. I can't exclude that she did not sustain some impacts from a fist, but a fist is not likely to cause all of these different lacerations of various orientations, and certainly it's not going to cause depressed skull fractures.
And what do you mean when you say significant force? What does that mean?
I can't put a quantitation on it, but just enough that these are not insignificant impacts to the head. They're done with enough force that it actually splits the skin and also causes depressed fractures and also causes hemorrhage within and around the brain.
So there would be quite a bit of strength behind the blows with this object.
Yes.
And are these injuries consistent, when you look at the specific ones in her head, are they consistent with being beaten with a firearm?
Yes, they could be.
And why do you say that?
Some are small, some are larger. An object such as a gun, and we know there's a gun present there because she's been shot, and it has different surfaces to it that can impart different shaped lacerations to the scalp. I can't totally exclude that another object wasn't used, but these are consistent with having been caused by a gun.
What are the types of surfaces that a gun would have that might cause lacerations of this type?
The handle, depending on which part of the gun strikes the skin.
All right, moving on to the x-ray that you took, 102U. Is this the x-ray of Ms. Peters' skull?
Yes, it is.
All right, it's a little difficult to see under this lighting. Maybe there. Where is the projectile located?
There is a projectile here, which ended up being the one at the back of the head, and there is a projectile here, which was from the gunshot wound to her ear. And then you can also see this metal here, which is a tongue stud.
I didn't hear what you said.
A tongue stud.
A tongue stud meaning like a tongue piercing?
Yes.
All right, what do we see in 102B?
This is a photograph of her head where this was an entry gunshot wound. There are all these different injuries. I could not tell which one was the actual entry gunshot wound, and it ends up it was this one.
And what about 102W?
Again, as part of the autopsy, this incision was made to reflect the scalp. I was able to find the projectile and follow the wound tract, and it came back to this injury. So this is actually an entry gunshot wound. The probe is here showing the direction that it came into her body.
And at what direction does that appear?
How this probe is going from her front to back.
And 102X?
This is the scalp reflected, and this is the projectile that's flattened that corresponded to that wound tract.
And what did you do with the projectile once you found it?
The projectile is removed and then is turned over to law enforcement.
Did you document that in 102Y?
Yes, during the autopsy, I will take a photograph of the projectile after it's removed and label where I recovered it from.
And were there law enforcement officers present during the autopsy?
Yes.
All right, moving on to some of the gunshot wounds. I want to show you 102Z. Which gunshot wound do we see here?
This is a gunshot wound here of the ear, and you can see all this black soot around there. That indicates to me that the gun was very close to the head when that wound was sustained.
And 102AA? What do we see here?
This is a close-up of the entry wound, again, better showing the soot so that the firearm was close to the body for that soot to be deposited on the skin.
And 102BB?
This is the ear being pulled forward to show that that wound tract, it perforated the earlobe, or just above the earlobe, and then re-entered the body here behind the ear.
And what are you inserting in here in 102CC?
This is just to show the wound tract of how, the angle that it was coming into her body.
And what about 102BB?
This is a photograph showing the projectile for that wound tract. And like I said, before it did not go very deep at all. It went about 1.5 inches and did not cause any significant injuries of the internal structures.
What about 102EE?
This is a photograph of that projectile that I removed and labeled it projectile from right side of jaw.
What do we see in 102FF?
This is the graze wound that I described on her right upper arm. You can see it's elongated, which shows the direction that it was traveling or the orientation. And again, it did not go deep, it just grazed the surface of the skin to cause this injury.
Did you give each gunshot wound a number as you were going through them?
Yes, I did.
And how many total gunshot wounds did she have?
I labeled 8, with the one, as I described, I believe possibly is a re-entry from this wound.
So there would be 8, possibly 9, or
7, possibly 8.
102GG? What do we see here?
This is a close-up of that wound, and what you can see here, it's faint for this wound, are these areas that we call stippling. And what happens when the gun is fired, the bullet comes out, but also what comes out is soot, and then there can also be some unburned powder flakes. The bullet can travel far. The soot and the unburned powder flakes, they do not travel very far. And that's what we take into consideration and look at when we're evaluating these wounds to try to determine how close the firearm was to the body. So in the wound to her ear, that soot was on the skin, so I know the gun was very close. As the gun's a little bit further back, we won't necessarily see the soot, but we'll see what we call stippling. And the unburned powder flakes are heavier, so they'll strike the skin and cause these little abrasions. And those don't wash off, they're actually small abrasions. And we call those wounds close range because the firearm is close to the body. Beyond that, then we just call it a distant range. We don't know how close the gun was. So for these wounds, when I'm evaluating them, that's what I'm looking for, soot, but I'm also looking for this stippling. So this indicates to me the gun was somewhat close to her body, enough for those powder flakes to strike the skin.
And 102HH? What do we see here?
This is the wound that entered her right anterior chest, the one that I think may be a continuation of the one that grazed the arm.
And there's 102II, a close-up.
This is a close-up of that entry wound.
Did you notice any soot or stippling here?
No. She had the shirt on, and when the bullet passes through the clothing, sometimes the clothing can shield that. So the soot or stippling that we would see on bare skin, we may not see if there's clothing there or hair covering up the skin.
Whereas her ear and her arm, there was nothing covering those areas.
That's correct.
All right. So what do we see in 102JJ?
This is a photograph of that wound tract internally. Here you're seeing her chest internally. Here's her right lung. Here's her left lung. What's being held up here is her sternum. So that wound tract was coming in the direction as having grazed the arm and re-entered the body. That's the direction the bullet was traveling. It passed just behind the sternum and went through the front part of the left lung. So it actually perforated that lung and then came over here into the chest wall. So that was the wound tract that it passed. It went through her chest, but really the only injury was that short distance that it went through the left lung.
What about 102KK?
This is a photograph showing the direction that it's coming. So like I said, it's coming across her chest.
102LL?
This is a photograph of that left chest. The organs have been removed, so this is looking at the posterior chest wall, and this probe is showing the path that passed through her body.
And 102 mm.
This is a photograph of the x-ray that shows the projectile that corresponds to that wound track. Here you can see the heart. Here on this left side of the photograph, here's her left chest cavity, and the projectile traveled over here into the skin.
What do we see in 102 mm?
This is where I recovered that projectile. This photograph is showing her left arm and the left side of her chest, and I could feel the projectile under the skin, so I made an incision of the skin to remove the projectile.
And 10200 is where you documented the projectile you removed and gave to law enforcement?
Yes, so this is a photograph of that projectile, and it's labeled projectile from left chest wall.
All right, moving on to 10200. What do we see in this photo?
This is a photograph showing the wound track through her left breast, which was actually going downward. So at the top of this photograph, you'll see the entry. This is her left breast. Right here at the top of the breast is where the wound track entered. It passed through the breast, exited here, and then it will re-enter the abdomen.
102 QQ.
This is a close-up of the entry wound. That's the upper breast.
RR.
This is a close-up of the exit wound as it passed through the left breast.
And 102 SS. What do we see here?
This is a photograph after I placed a probe along the wound tract where you can see it's traveling through the breast, and here now is showing the re-entry wound where it enters the skin again.
And then 102 TT.
This is a close-up of that re-entry wound.
What about in 102 UU?
This is a photograph of an x-ray that was taken of her abdomen. And here on the left side you can see the projectile.
And 102 UU.
This is a photograph of the skin reflected, which here are her intestines, and there was no hemorrhage or any injury internally as far as the abdominal cavity. The wound tract just passed through that anterior abdominal wall, and that's where I recovered the projectile.
Did this cause any significant injuries?
No, it did not.
What about 102 WW?
This is another photograph showing where I recovered the projectile.
Okay. And then 102 XX.
This is a photograph of the projectile, which I labeled projectile from left anterior abdominal wall.
What do we see in 102 YY?
This is a photograph of her back. She's been rolled up on her side so we can examine her back. What you're seeing here is the gunshot wound that was to her back. There was a small abrasion here on the upper back, but what this photograph is showing is the gunshot wound.
And 102 ZZ.
This is a close-up photograph of that entry wound.
And 102 AAA.
This is a photograph shown internally in that left chest cavity where the wound tract goes. The previous wound tract that came through the chest exited here. This one had this orientation, so came in the back and entered the chest here and traveled this short distance. It also injured the left lung by just passing through the lung and then back out of the chest.
102 triple B.
This is a photograph of the lung showing where the injuries were through the lung tissue.
And 102 triple C.
This was a photograph of the left upper arm, and the projectile was way out here in the arm. So this wound tract was coming in the back, went through a portion of the lung, and then came through this arm, and I recovered it from over here on the lateral arm.
What would her orientation to the shooter have to be to sustain this injury? Facing a shooter or away from the shooter?
Not facing the shooter because the wound's coming in her back. When I'm showing you these wound tracks and the orientation and the track that it went through the body, I don't know the position of her body at the time. All I can tell from the direction of that wound tract is where the gun is in relation to her. So the gun would have to align with that track. And again, I don't know what she's doing, if she's leaning over, if she's up or down, but I just know where the firearm would be in relation to her body, and that's why we document the direction of the wound tracks through the body.
Anything you can tell us about where the gun was in relation to her body from the wound track here?
The gun would be behind her and towards her right, because the wound tract is going from her back to front and towards her left.
And what do we have in 102 DDD?
This is a photograph of the skin. Again, I could feel the projectile under the skin, so I make an incision in order to remove the projectile.
And then 102 EEE?
This is a photograph of that projectile, labeled projectile from left upper arm.
What about in 102 FFF?
This was a gunshot wound of the left superior shoulder. Here's the wound, and then there are these injuries around it.
What do we see in 102 GGG?
This is a close-up of that wound. What you can see in this photograph, here is the wound. It looks like there is a little bit of soot here. It will end up exiting here. So again, it just goes through this muscle and skin. Here is the stippling that I explained before, and it looks like there's stippling here, and this void, I believe, was from her shirt, so that there's no stippling, there's none of the powder striking the skin here because of clothing. But this was a close range wound. There is stippling, and it just travels a short distance.
In 102 HHH.
This is a photograph showing, again, a view where you can see the entry and the exit.
And what about 102 III?
This is a photograph with a probe going through it. So the top of the photograph here is the front of her body, and this just shows the wound tract.
And where would the gun be in relation to Mrs. Peters' body for this wound track?
It was coming from in front of her, so she would be facing towards the gun.
Right. 102 JJJ. What do we see here?
This is her right arm, which shows another wound tract.
What part of her arm is this?
It's her forearm. You can see her hand here, and here's her thumb.
Right or left?
Her right.
About 102 triple K.
This is the entry wound for that gunshot wound. Again, you can see stippling around the wound. So this is another shot where the gun is in close proximity to her body.
LLL.
This is a photograph of the exit wound. This is a photograph of the forearm showing a probe going through it to show the wound track.
All right, considering these 8 gunshot wounds, if you count the reentry, can you tell whether the suspect was shooting up at her or down at her?
As I said, I don't know the position of her body, but looking at all of these gunshot wounds, they're all going in different directions, in different orientations. None of them are causing significant injuries, other than the 2 that passed through her lung, but that would not be immediately fatal. And she certainly would still be able to fight and run after that. So of all these gunshot wounds, I think she still was actively fighting, and that's why they're coming in from different angles and different orientations.
So the fact that they're in different orientations, that's more consistent with her moving around rather than being stationary.
Correct.
Can you determine the order of injuries, the order of gunshot wounds she sustained?
No, I cannot.
All right, I want to move on to some of Ms. Peters' hand injuries. What do we see in 102 NNN?
This is a photograph of her right hand. You can see several breaks in the skin, and there's swelling.
And what does the swelling indicate?
Just that where there are injuries, and some of the swelling is associated with the fractures. You can see the one finger is somewhat distorted due to a fracture.
Which finger was that?
This finger here, the ring finger.
And 102 000?
This is another view of the hand. And again, you can see this purple discoloration and swelling and additional abrasions.
PPP.
This is a photograph of the palm on her hand, and you can see this purple discoloration, again, where there's bleeding into the tissues and on the finger.
What about 102 QQQ?
This is a photograph that shows that there are fractures of the hand.
What do we see in 102 RRR?
This is a photograph of her left hand. Again, you can see that there's swelling here on the hand and some purple discoloration and several abrasions.
102 SSS?
This photograph shows her small finger that basically was partially amputated.
And does she have some natural nails and some acrylic nails?
Yes.
What do you see in 102 TTT?
This is a photograph of her left palm. Again, there's areas where there's purple discoloration, where there's bleeding in the soft tissues.
And 102 UUU?
This is a photograph that actually between the web or along the web of her index finger and middle finger, where that actually even tore. And here again, you can see the injury to the little finger.
And 102 VVV?
This is a photograph that shows here, where you can see the fracture of this middle finger and then the injury to the tip of the little finger.
You mentioned that these wounds to Miss Peters' hands were defensive wounds, or defense-type wounds. Are these injuries more consistent with her hands coming in contact with another person's body or with an object?
It could be both, but with the amount of trauma and break in the fingers, I suspect it's a heavy object or whatever, also causing her other injuries, and she's trying to defend herself, and her hands are sustaining the same type of impacts that her head is sustaining.
Did you do a further internal examination where you observed the contents of her stomach?
Yes.
Okay, what did you see when you observed the contents of her stomach?
She had about 150 ml of some material in there with some partially digested food.
Okay. And what does that tell you?
I look at that just to see how soon she had eaten. I mean, people can digest the food at a different rate, but when we can actually see partially digested food there, it just indicates that they had eaten within a few hours of passing away.
So for Ms. Peters, were you able to determine her cause of death?
Yes.
And what was it?
I ruled the cause of death is blunt traumatic injuries of her head and face and multiple gunshot wounds, just because she had sustained all of these injuries. But as I described, the most significant injuries were the ones to her head.
So you would say that the blunt force impact to her head was the main cause of death of all of the injuries she had?
Yes, she could likely have survived just the gunshot wounds, but she would not have survived the head trauma.
And she would have been able to get away or move around even after sustaining all the gunshot wounds you went through today?
Yes.
Can you give us a time of Miss Peters' death?
There's no way to put an exact time on someone has died, especially under circumstances like this when there was a very violent struggle. Usually what we'll look at is more of the circumstances of, when she was last seen alive, when her normal routine would have changed, when she was no longer heard from, what she was wearing, what's going on at the house to try to determine when she would have last been alive.
Okay. And when she would have last eaten, was that why you checked the contents of her stomach as well?
Yes.
All right.
So finish from this view.
Yes, sir.
Oh, we take a break. We'll take 10 minutes.